Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name's Justin. Today I want to do a video about buying used electronic drums. What are some red flags that tell you not to buy this drum set, how to figure out whether or not a drum set is a good deal, and whether or not to buy online versus in person, what websites to use, how to evaluate a drum set when you're in person checking out for different flaws a drum set may have from overuse. We're going to talk about everything. By the way, I'm also going to be making a second video about how to best sell your electronic drum set for the most amount of money. Okay, so the first thing to tackle is whether or not to buy online or in person. Your selection is better online, but you're going to pay more for that. However, you can save more money if you buy locally, and it depends on where you live. If you want to buy an individual component, so let's say you want to get a better ride cymbal, a larger ride cymbal, or a higher quality one, I would go and buy online because you'll get a larger selection to choose from. Meanwhile, if you're trying to buy a complete drum set, I would first check out your local used market. You need to give yourself time. If you need to buy an electronic drum set by Saturday, go buy a new one. All right, you'll have 100% certainty it's in good working condition, and if not, you can always return it and get a full refund or a substitute. However, if you're going to buy a used electronic drum set and you need something by Saturday, that means you're going to be rushing. And you're going to be running headlong into some deal that may or may not actually be worth the money. So I would recommend you give yourself at least a month or two when shopping the used market. Maybe you're a lucky person, you'll find something great the very next day. But for most of us, we kind of have to wade through a lot of crummy deals before we find something. So giving yourself a long time to really research the market will pay dividends. Okay, so now we need to talk about what type of used electronic drums to buy. Because believe it or not, there's a lot of different used electronic drums out there. So let's run through them. You can buy a 30-day return. My Roland TD30K was a 30-day return. Someone bought it, decided they didn't really want to pay that much money for a drum set, and they returned it to a store. I then bought it from the music store, and it was in almost perfect condition. I saved a couple $100. That guy returned his drum set. The store ended up reselling it to another buyer. Everyone's happy. The second kind of used electronic drum set is person to person. This is where you'll save the most money because you're literally, sending someone a stack of 20s and they're giving you a drum set. Usually you can negotiate better with a real person. The next kind of used electronic drum set is a store floor model. You just don't buy a floor model. The reason is that there's hundreds and hundreds of drummers streaming into this music store. It's already been beaten to death and then you're going to buy it. It's just not a really good idea. The next kind of used electronic drum set is a trade-in. This actually might be a good deal. Now, don't confuse floor models from trade-ins because they're sometimes like sitting right next to each other at Guitar Center or Sam Ash. You'll have a wall full of drum sets that are kind of like half folded up. And that's because someone brought in their old drum set and traded it in for some store credits and then bought a new drum set with part of that money. So those have just been used by one or two people probably. So those are different from store floor models and might be worth, it might be worth you looking into those. I should probably also mention refurbished electronic drums. So let's say, for example, there was a Mimic module that had some sort of factory defect and whatever, you're buying one that has been fixed by certified technicians. That might also be a good buy. I've just never really bought any certified refurbished electronic drums, and they don't seem to be quite as common as they are in the laptop world. But those are all the different ways, for the most part, of buying a used electronic drum set. For me personally, I would rather buy one from a regular person that lives in my town or a few towns away, because that's how I'll save the most money. My next bet would be to buy one from a music store. So whether or not that's from Guitar Center or Edrum Center or Sam Ash or Music Go Around, that's my second choice. One last tip before we move ahead to the next point is that if you ever see a drum set with the label as is condition, just assume the drum set is broken in some way that you can't quite tell from the photos. Photos can be very, very convincing about how good of a condition the drum set is in, when in fact it's actually broken, because a photo is not the same as playing it in person. Okay, so by now let's say that you've been looking for an electronic drum set for about a month or two. You've been scoping out the landscape, you've been seeing the deals that have come and gone on eBay and Facebook Marketplace and all that stuff, and now you have a drum set you're thinking about buying. In fact, you're getting a little bit worked up over it and you really, really want to buy the drum set, but you don't know if you're getting a good deal or not. Here's how to go about figuring out what the drum set is actually worth. Go on ebay.com, type in the name of your drum set, and hold up, no, that's not actually what the drum set's really worth. You need to sort by sold listings, because there's a difference between what the drum sets are currently being offered at and what people have paid real money for. It's just a rough guide, obviously, because some drum sets are in mint condition and then some drum sets are beaten up, so you kind of have to be careful, but it gives you a good guide to what the drum set might be worth. That way, if you see a Roland TD11 KV and someone's trying to sell it for like, I don't know, $1,200, you'll know that it's actually selling for like $800 or something on the used market. And this brings me to my next point. Just be aware that people will lie in the descriptions of their postings. People won't always remember what they actually paid for their drum set, and sometimes I've seen people mislead people by saying the MSRP. Now, the MSRP is a fake price that companies will put on their website that no one actually charges for the drum set, and it makes their actual price look good in comparison. I should probably also mention that you'll see this phrase pop up a lot. The current version of this drum set sells for $8,000. They're comparing their $5,000 drum set to the current $8,000 drum set. And these are like misleading statements that are technically true, but really have no significance to you, the potential buyer. All right, so now let's take a second to talk about old electronic drums. And by old, I do not mean vintage electronic drums. Not talking about stuff from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. I'm talking about stuff within the timeline of like 2011 to 1990, all right? It's not old enough to be vintage, but it's not new enough for anybody to want to buy. There's a couple of key rules that I look into when buying any stuff from this era. The first is that I am not going to be paying very much money for it, okay? These are electronic instruments, just like a keyboard. You wouldn't pay too much for a keyboard from 2005. The sounds aren't as good, it's had a lot of use, it's electronic, so who knows how much more life it has in it. The same mentality goes towards used electronic drums from the early 2000s and maybe the 90s, or even something from 2007. 2007 was a long time ago in electronic terms. For an analogy, let's say that you're buying a used car, and this used car that you're looking at has 100,000 miles on it. Is it worth buying? Well, maybe if the price is low enough and the brand is really good in the reputation department. If it's a used Toyota with 100,000 miles on it, it still has plenty of life on it. It might be worth buying. However, if you know it's a brand that is famous for breaking down once it gets to around this mileage, then you wouldn't buy it, all right? Because it doesn't have the reputation to back it up. Same thing goes for used electronic drums. I would buy a used Roland drum set from 2005. I would buy a used Yamaha drum set from 2005. There's a couple of other brands out there. However, I wouldn't buy a used Alesis drum set from 2005 because it doesn't have the reputation to back it up that it will last for years and years of further use. I wouldn't buy a used Millennium drum set from around that time period, or a used Gear for Music drum set from around that time period, or a used Cat Percussion drum set, or a used Simmons drum set from around that time period. Most of those drum sets that I just mentioned, they're made by two Chinese companies called Medeli and HXM. They're fine if you buy them new, just like there are certain car companies where you can buy one of their new cars, but you don't expect to get 300,000 miles out of it, all right? Same thing happens in the drum world as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to tackle is bundles, because bundles can be a good deal, but they've also suckered in a lot of people to buy stuff that maybe wasn't the best fit for them. So for example, sometimes you'll see that a guy, he tried out drumming and decided it's no longer for him. So he's not going to be selling everything separate. He wants to get rid of it all right this second, all right? So he's selling the drum set with sticks, with headphones, with the amp, with the kick pedal, with the throne, with the hi-hat stand, with all kinds of extra stuff that he bought just because he thought he was really going to be into this hobby. But the problem is you need to make sure you actually need everything in that bundle, because he's charging you for all that stuff. The whole sales pitch in the description of these posts is that you're getting a good deal because he's including the drum amp. However, you might be buying a drum set and you live in an apartment, and a drum amp isn't actually going to help you in the situation because you're going to be more of a headphone guy, all right? So you're going to be buying this drum set and you're paying for an amp that you're not going to use. So you're buying something that isn't really a good fit for you. So just be careful with bundles. They can be a great deal because those extra little costs really do bite you in the butt if you don't already have the gear, or if you aren't expecting to have to buy that stuff. So a bundle can be a great deal, but only if you need the stuff in the bundle. Otherwise, you're buying crap that you don't need and it's going to sit in a closet. You got to try to play this drum set in person if at all possible. The reason why you want to do this is that pictures do not tell the full story. Even a video doesn't tell the full story. From running this YouTube channel, I know that I can make a drum set look amazing even if it isn't, if I wanted to and if I wasn't honest when making videos. So you need to make sure that you're actually getting the full story on the drum set you're about to buy. One of the reasons why I really like buying stuff in person, because I can test it. I can know for a fact that it actually works versus buying something from eBay from a guy that lives halfway across the country. So here's what to look for if you're buying a used electronic drum set and you have the luxury of playing it in person to really test it. The first is to check the drum module screen. Unfortunately, there are some brands out there, including Roland, that have a history of getting dead pixel lines or the screen fading over time. Just make sure the screen is in perfect condition, because if you think you can get away with the screen being slightly damaged, you might be right, But you might be wrong, because there are certain editing parameters where you get to a certain menu screen and there's a blotch there in the screen and you don't even know what you're editing anymore. The second thing is to check out the cymbals. No one ever warns you of this, but the cymbals are always the first thing to go on an electronic drum set. Even high quality brands like Roland, their cymbals definitely break. Roland cymbals break, Elise's cymbals break, everybody's cymbals can break over time because of the angle of attack and everything. They're the first part of the drum set to break. So make sure every zone of every cymbal is triggering accurately, even the soft hits. I would also look at the wear and tear of cymbals. A lot of times cymbals will have those ridges on them, and if they're worn down, like a tire that's gone on for way too many miles, it might be worth avoiding that drum set, because if the cymbals are worn down that much, this drum set has been through the ringer. I would also ask the person if they've done any sort of like DIY fixes, because you don't know if that person is actually any good with a soldering iron. If they've tried to fix this drum set in the past, who knows if their fixes will hold up over the long term. So sort of confirm with them if they've ever touched the internals of the drums or not. Just make sure that the drum set has been in good working condition over its lifespan. I would also take a look at all the mesh heads, make sure there's no fraying at the centers, because even if it doesn't look like the mesh heads are damaged that much, once it starts to fray, just like if you get a crack in an acoustic cymbal, it goes and it builds and it goes and it grows. And then eventually you're going to have to replace that mesh head. And mesh heads, thankfully, they're really not that expensive anymore. They're kind of sort of on par with acoustic head pricing, on eBay at least. But you'd rather not replace mesh heads if you don't have to. The next thing is to make sure you've tested out every single zone on this drum set. Sometimes if you're just like playing a groove and you're doing a couple of tom fills, you're not really noticing if every little aspect of the drum set is in working order. Make sure you hit the tom rim and the tom head of every single tom that you got. Make sure the snare, all the zones of the snare are perfectly working. Make sure the kick drum is perfectly working as well. If something is really fishy and not quite working right, you can do a factory reset on the module, which will restore all the factory settings of when it came out of the original manufacturing plant. That will fix some weird double triggering problems at times. So do that if you're kind of worried about whether or not a triggering problem is happening. It will sort of narrow it down for you. Just make sure that the person hadn't bought a copy of V Expressions or something, because they use that as a selling point. You don't want to delete that. But if it's just like some custom kits and they don't really care, you can do a factory reset, and sometimes it will fix problems. The next thing that I would check are all the cable connections on the module, especially the headphones. Sometimes the headphone jack can go bad because people have been messing around with it and it's just gotten loose. So make sure there's no static or anything like that. Also check out all the different faders and knobs. Make sure nothing's too loose, or just make sure the module is in good working condition. Modules are usually built to be pretty tough, so I would not worry about a scratch because it fell over or something, but just make sure that there's nothing obviously bad with it. All right, so now let's take a step back and say that you've gone through all these steps, you found a drum set you want, it's at a decent price. Here's the last thing that I would do. If you're buying online, such as eBay, there's a button that says make an offer. Just make an offer for $100 less and see if they bite. Sometimes you're willing to buy a drum set at a given price, but you make an offer for just a little bit less and they'll just give it to you because they don't know you've already decided to buy it. So make an offer, see if they'll give you an even lower price. And also, if you're buying in person, you can either offer them a little bit less money, which can be awkward. You have to be kind of skilled at this, or you can try to get them to add something in the mix. So for example, I was buying a Roland TD17 KVX from a guy and he wasn't including the hi-hat stand. And I just asked him to include the hi-hat stand that he had on the drum set right there. And he did. It's all negotiation. That's the great thing about the used market. If you wait long enough, if you offer, a certain amount of money to enough people, eventually somebody out there will bite. Have an amazing day, guys, and I'll see you all in a few.